Today is October 17th, 2014. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and it is my honor to be interviewing Reuben Cannon for the Archive of American Television here in North Hollywood, California. So let's start right at the beginning. What was your name at birth?
Reuben E. Cannon, Reuben Ernest Cannon, Jr.
And when and where were you born?
Chicago, Illinois, February 11th, 1946.
Did you grow up in Chicago as well?
Grew up in Chicago.
And what were your parents' names and what did they do for a living?
My father's name was Reuben Cannon also, and he was a butcher, worked at the stockyard. And my mother's Mildred Cannon, we had a mother of four. She worked as a domestic and as a home wife.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
A strong work ethic from my father, enormous sense of responsibility. In fact, my father died when I was 8 years old. So when he died of a heart attack at 8 years old, I was 28, he was very, very young. And I was 8 years old. My mother said to me, Junior, you're now the man of the house. And I simply imitated what my father did, even to the point of giving my brother and sisters an allowance. I went to work at just various jobs, shining shoes, delivering groceries, emptying trash in the neighborhood. So on Friday I could do what my father did, which was to give a quarter and 50 cents to my two sisters and my brother. And that carried on pretty much throughout life, where I've continued. In fact, just recently, like this year, I finally cut them off their allowance because my wife and I were on a fixed income, so it was time to discontinue their allowance. It has gone up, proportionally but it was something I always took pride in. So that was the values. I think it was the work ethic that has really guided me throughout my career and distinguished my career. In fact, it was that I always felt that you get paid not for what you know or who you know, but for what you do. And just my father, who was such a provider, great provider, and we didn't have a lot of time together, but the short time we had, I picked up some values from him that have held me in good stead all my life.
So you have 3 siblings then?
Yes.
And what are their names?
Sandra, Sheila, and Ronnie.
And what were some of your interests as a kid?
Always entertainment and music, and sports, basketball. In fact, my father died on the basketball court playing a pickup game, and I was just in awe of watching him play. So basketball is one of my favorite sports, and running. And the running came after watching him have a heart attack, so I felt, what could I do to help stay healthy, to make sure that, almost in my mind, I said, look, if I'm going to have this thing at 28, it's going to have to catch me, because I'll be busy running. But it was really, I had a wonderful first tenor voice. I say wonderful based on what people have told me. I mean, I won a talent show when I was 12 or 13, when I was like 10 or 12 years old. And that introduced me to another way of life. When my father died, we moved into the housing project. And the housing project that I grew up in is called the Harrell Ickes Housing Project in Chicago, on Cermak and State. They built the projects, but they didn't build a school. But they did build they built a community center. And that community center was an oasis in this project where you could go and be introduced to the arts, and that's where I first started singing and formed a little doo-wop group called Reuben and the Regulars. Then later on it just became Reuben Cannon. So I declared a solo artist career when I was like 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I recently, I recently ran into the director of that center, which is what, this is now 2014, 4 months ago. I knew her, but I didn't connect it till I read her resume. When I said to her, the Henry Booth House, which was a rec center, community center in Ickes, did you ever work there? And she says, I was a director for 2 years. So here was a connection I made with Barbara King, Dr. Barbara King, 58 years later. Wow. And I just let her know that her impact on my life, just by her presence and her words of encouragement, was part of help shape and guide my career. But it was music, it was the arts. I mean, I've been very blessed. I've only had 4 or 5 jobs, including my paper route, that was not connected to entertainment. It was once I won that talent show, I was introduced to theater and was given a scholarship to a community theater and did various plays around Chicago. And then my voice changed during the pubescent period of my life. And it wasn't said, but I kind of overheard the theater saying, look, he can't sing, he can't act, what are we going to do with him? And that kind of guided me also to say, look, I think I want to be behind the scenes. I want to be the person in charge of hiring and staffing as opposed to a performer. There's always a performer in you, but the idea of empowering other performers and encouraging actors. And I think the reason I love actors so much, because having had a short career as an actor, I understand the emotions that they have to draw upon to do various roles. So it helped guide my career, that experience of as an actor. And what actors go through, I just think it's a wonderful profession and career, and I love the arts, but especially what it takes to be an actor, because it demands a lot. So those were the influence, and it was truly and that's why I'm such an advocate also of arts for young people, because it saved my life, but not for the arts. Who knows, given where I grew up, where I might have ended up.
So what high school did you attend?
I attended Dunbar High School, which is a vocational high school, and I majored in printing. And because I wasn't thinking about Hollywood at the time, I was just thinking about developing a craft that could help, or a trade that would supply me with an income. I became a father in high school. I was a father at 17, so it became even more important to think about employment. College was not in my plans. So when I graduated at 17 from high school, I went to work at a printing company, and then shortly thereafter I went to work at for a short while at the steel mill, U.S. Steel, and made more money than I ever imagined at the steel mill with overtime. But I was advised by the old timers there to get out before you get hooked on the money, and the money was quite good. You figure this is 60. In the mid-'60s, like 66, I was earning $1,000 a week, but one day I went home and I took a bath, and I looked at the water, and the water looked like a sheet of metal. So the iron ore had soaked into my pores to the point that you couldn't distinguish between, a plate of steel or the water that was in the tub. So I left and went back to community college, Southeast City College. And there once again spent time with arts and with plays, and went to work as a meter reader. Got a job later on working as a People Gas Company in Chicago, reading gas meters, and that was quite an adventure, because it was you have to go to places where people rarely go. It's like in their basement or attics, and you see things and you see people in a different way. But I knew that unless I did something, that would be my life. So I left that job when a friend called from Los Angeles that I worked with the steel mill, and said, Reuben, if you come out to L.A., I can provide a sofa for you to sleep on, and you can get a job at the studio that you've always talked about. You can really work in the arts. And so I worked and saved up $500 and bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. And with with total faith and confidence, because I've often led my life by faith and not by sight. So I had faith that I knew how to work, I wouldn't starve, and between my sister and my mother and other family members, between their prayers and my prayers, I would be okay. So I caught a plane to Los Angeles, November 17th, 1971, and I had $500 in savings and a sofa to sleep on. So I knew the location of Universal Studios and Warner Brothers, and I made the rounds and filled out applications at all the studios. And the jobs I had acquired in Chicago that my uncles had given me, and my uncles had given me a philosophy of how to always get a job. And the philosophy was that if you want to work, go to the place that you're seeking employment the day after payday, because someone will have gone out and partied and wouldn't show up, and there's going to be a shortage. And these were blue-collar labor gang type jobs. So the principle of the philosophy was that, and it never failed. I got my job as a busboy at a restaurant that way. I got my job at the steel mill that way. So I applied that same principle to my seeking employment here at Universal or in Hollywood. So when I was interviewed at Universal for a job, I said to the person in HR, "When is payday?" And he looked at me rather strangely. And so I said, "When do people at the studio here, when do they get paid?" He said, "We have different unions and different guilds here, so every day here someone's getting paid." I said, "Great, I'll be here every day." And I did. I rode the bus from Crenshaw and Adams to Universal Studios from November 17th to December 28th. Now, I decided I needed to divide my time between maybe, increase my odds, so I started going. I would spend the morning at Universal Studios in the personnel department, in the afternoon at Warner Brothers. And I'm really getting concerned because I'm saying, look, I've got $28 left of my 500, and I'm not working, and I don't have a return ticket. May have to get a real job. Because I would be sitting outside in the personnel department waiting for someone to say we need help and whatever. My belief was that if you would just give me a chance to work on the lot, I'll find my way. Mm-hmm. New Year's Eve, I'm sitting outside there in the personnel department of Universal Studios, and a gentleman named Jim Harris said, "Reuben, we need some help in the mailroom because two of the mail boys are stuck at a ski resort. They can't get Northern California." And I went through that door for the first time on New Year's Eve.
That's great. Let me stop you there for 1 second. So you were saying you got your first in the mailroom.
Right. So it was, you can imagine sitting outside in the personnel department for approximately almost a month and going, so I hadn't even been on the lot. I was simply but New Year's Eve, I was called in to help simply bag the mail. And the mailroom was referred to as the executive training program. To work in the mailroom, it required a college degree. I didn't have a college degree, an undergrad degree. But I was confident if they gave me a chance, I would find my way. And so it would have been the mailroom, could have been any department, but the mailroom was an ideal place. So from New Year's Eve, after the holidays, I was called into the personnel department. And because first of all, let me just go back. I was shocked at the job I was required to do, which is to bag the mail and sort it out. There two people. It was a job for two people. This is a joke. But I did it, and apparently did it well. And that following week, I was called in the personnel department. They said, "We'd like to hire you." So I don't know why they made an exception, but something they saw. So I was the only non-college graduate in the mailroom, and there was. The mailroom was populated with a lot of offsprings of famous personalities and really talented aspiring filmmakers. Just to name a few, Jay Heifetz, whose father was Yasha Heifetz, was in the mailroom, and John David, whose father was Hal David, or Backrack and David, and a good friend who we remained friends, Bob Gersh, and I were in the mailroom together, and a few other notables, but those were the main friends in the mailroom.
So what do you think they saw in you to bring you in?
I don't know. I would want to believe just maybe maybe it was after the work had been done, so in a short period of time. So it was they had a week to evaluate my work ethic, my attitude, and that's so between that and I believe the gentleman who interviewed me, Jim Harris, must have seen some integrity or just some character traits that he admired. And I wasn't going to let him down. And I said that to him when he interviewed me. I said, "Well, if you can get me on the lot in any department, I'll make you proud." And so after once I knew I officially had a job, I was able to get off my friend's sofa. I needed to find an apartment. I didn't have a car. So I found an apartment about a mile away from Universal Studios on Cahuenga Boulevard, right across from what at that time was Hanna-Barbera. And I would walk to work every day, because I was so excited. I mean, I couldn't believe that here I was going to be making $115 a week in the mailroom. This is 1971 now, 72. In the mailroom, or at Universal Studios. I mean, and And the way it worked, that every week you delivered a different mail to a different area. You would be delivering mail to the prop department on one week. The second week you'd be delivering mail to the wardrobe department. So the idea was to become familiar with every aspect of a studio and how a studio operates. You also would be delivering mail to stars. I mean, on my mail route there was Alfred Hitchcock, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, and they were on your mail route. And in the music department, I mean, the closest I ever came to getting fired is that I love jazz, and one time on my mail route, I saw that Quincy Jones was there doing the score for Ironside, and I I intentionally went onto the recording stage, and there was Harry Sweets Edison. I mean, jazz giants I'd listened to in Chicago, and Ray Brown, and Oliver Nelson conducting this, the score for Ironside, and it was just. And I was late because everything was timed. And I got back a little late, including getting Alfred Hitchcock his paper late. and he complained, where's my paper? Because he was a sports fan, and he always wanted his paper early. But I was just mesmerized by this all-star jazz band on the sound stage. So I received a warning for that, and I would just time myself to try to go over during lunchtime or something like that, so I wouldn't, But shortly after, maybe after 6 months in the mailroom, and really building up a reputation with my customers, who ranged from, the guys in the fire department to, a couple notable stars. I applied the principles, and I said this recently, and that everything I need to know about Hollywood, I learned in my paper route. Delivering newspapers in Chicago, there were 3 principles that you needed to follow. One was deliver the paper on time, promptly, every day, without apology, without excuses, but be responsible for delivering the newspaper every day. And Chicago, as you know, has very brutal winters, so you can find a lot of reasons not to get out in the cold, but I never missed a day, and I had a wonderful paper route with 50 customers. The second rule is to get to know your customers, because if you don't know your customers, you can't collect your money. And I was very fortunate that on my paper route, even though I lived in a housing project, on my paper route, 2 blocks over, there were black men running businesses. There was, on my paper route, there was John Johnson of John Johnson Publishing Company, and there was John Stenstack, who owned the Chicago Defender. And there was Jesse Owens, who at that time had a public relations firm called Owens West. So even though I grew up in a project and maybe not have had the best role models, because there were people there doing things that could be self-destructive, on my paper route I saw success. I saw particularly black men that inspired me that, hey, I could do this, and they encouraged me. So it was a wonderful sense of how the community. What I said is that even though I grew up in a project, the community made me their project and wouldn't let me fail. So the second rule, get to know your customers. The third rule is don't get robbed, because that's a very clear threat, because while you're delivering papers, there's some guys who simply follow you on your route, and then they rob you when they know you're collecting money. And I managed to avoid, except for one time, the guy stuck me up for my money. Even though I tried to talk him out of it and tried to encourage him to find a different, he said, look, I use the papers, I rob people, so give me your money. So. But those 3 principles, deliver the paper on time, promptly, get to know your customers, and don't get robbed. I transferred that same philosophy to my mail route at Universal, which is what? Deliver the mail every day, promptly and on time, without excuses. Get to know your customers, because when you need a recommendation for a promotion, the mailroom is where the studio promotes from. You can get recommendations. And third, once again, don't let anyone rob you of your dreams. So the same principles applied. After 6 months, I was offered a job to be head of personnel in the tour division. So after 6 months, I would have gotten an increase in salary from $115 a week to $125 a week, with a title. But one of the benefits of growing up in Chicago is that you are forced to evaluate things from a different perspective. And so I learned to ask questions, a lot of questions early on. So what appeared to be a promotion really could have been a setback, because the tour division, when I inquired how many producers or directors have ever come out of the tour divisions, and this was the early days of Universal Tours, the answer was none. Tours are tours. Movies are made on the studio lot. So I declined the offer. Continued to walk to work, didn't have a car, and stayed in the mailroom another 3 or 4 months. And whenever there's a position available, it's posted first in the mailroom, because the mailroom is, as the so-called executive training program, is where the studio would first look for staffing. A position became available in the casting department. The head of the department was a gentleman named Ralph Winters, and I introduced myself doing my mail deliveries, and the position was a casting director trainee, and always 2 or 3 people from the mailroom, members of the mailroom, would go and interview for the job. In this case, it was John David, Jay Heifetz, and Reuben Cannon. All were being interviewed by the Universal Casting Department to be a trainee. And Ralph Winters, during the interview, said to me, if I had political ambitions, I would have to hire one of the other gentlemen, either John or Jay, because their letter of recommendations are far more impressive. They had recommendations from stars. I decided to go in on the strength of my character, my resume. If it had to do with casting, my experience in theater, my knowledge of theater, is what I was going on. So I didn't take any. I could, because if to me, if someone doesn't speak to your character, someone who's known you, to ask Alfred Hitchcock for a letter of recommendation, he could recommend how to deliver mail, but he couldn't recommend anything else about his knowledge and the history of my life. So Ralph said, if I had political aspirations at the studio, I would have to hire one of the other 2 gentlemen. You're more qualified, and for the first time in my career, I'm going to do what's fair and what's right, because I'm going to retire in 3 years, so I can afford to do that. And he hired me, and in hiring me to be a trainee, I became the first African American to ever work in any at Universal Studios in the casting department. And I took the job very seriously. I knew it was an opportunity. I felt so fortunate, and once again, I told him I won't disappoint you. I'll circle back to a full circle moment where I hired his daughter for a role in The Winds of War later on when we get down further into the interview.
Wow. So what did you do then as a trainee? What were your duties?
To type contracts and to assist every other casting director in the department, which was the best. That was like film school. Mm-hmm. During those days, I'm going back to now, you're talking the mid-'70s, Universal was the largest TV supplier in Hollywood. They had more TV shows on than anyone, and so they had 8 casting directors working in the casting department. And so as the trainee, my job was to provide services, whatever support the other casting directors needed, which was usually tracking down film. And that was before the DVDs and before VHSs, so I meant going to the film library, looking at film, marking it, arranging a screening in a screening room for all, so if they wanted to introduce a producer to an actor, they say, well, you should see his performance in X. Then they said, Reuben, find me this movie, mark it, and schedule a range of screening. So that was my job every day. So as a result, I was working with film editors and working with projectionists all the time, almost around the clock, and carrying film cans. So walking, carrying film cans, and then at evening typing up contracts for all those various shows. And
contracts for the actors? For the actors,
day players, so Screen Actors Guild contracts, day players, 3 days and weeklies, and answering phones and just trainee, anyone to go for it, getting lunch for the entire office. It was just, it was a wonderful experience, and there was one particular guy who I would say crossed the line in terms of making demands. And I would walk home and from end of the day and just curse and scream. It's like, thank God I didn't have a car. I have the 1 mile walk allowed me to just vent and have a conversation almost with God about why this guy is, to touch his heart and change his heart. Years later, he said, Reuben, the reason I was so hard on you because I knew you had great potential, and I felt, there could have been a better way. But it was a challenge to not just explode one day and just punch this guy out. But I got past. A year later, he also came to me for a job. So.
So how did you move
But the working with 8 different casting directors and as Ralph Winter's assistant, the head of the department, set the stage for what was the most, transformative opportunity in my career. There was a TV series called Ironside. The producer of that series was a gentleman named Cy Shermack, and Cy Shermack was a very boisterous producer, and he had hired. The way it works in the casting department, a casting director is assigned to a TV series. So the various casting directors had been hired to cast Ironside and had been fired by Cy Shermack. No one lasted more than a season or half a season. And there was no one left in the department to hire as a casting director except Ralph Winters, who was a department head. So Ralph said to me, Reuben, I don't do casting, I'm a department head, but I have to take over the show because there's no one left in the department because Cy has fired everybody. And he says, I want you to go with me, and I want you to pay close attention, and in the next season, I want you to take over the show. So when I got the job in casting, I put myself on a diet to become knowledgeable of actors. I loved film, but I wanted to increase my knowledge. So my diet was 20 hours of television per week, 2 films per week, and 2 plays per week. So whenever I would be if I was in the room with a producer or director, I would be the most knowledgeable. And that was my diet, and it lasted for a long time. So when it was time to step in to do the casting for Ironside, I did the show I ended up doing the series for 3 years.
At what point did you come into the series?
After a year, after Ralph Winters, I was Ralph Winters' assistant, casting director for a year when he took the show over. And stayed with the series for 2 or 3 seasons, and which meant that I was able to get along with Cy Shermack, even though no one else had. He was totally supportive, and because I had done my homework, and that was my life. I didn't have much social life. My life was built around, learning my craft. In fact, my mom would call, and I said, "Look, Mom, show business is my life. That's not a life. That was the moment. So I became a casting director. And then from Ironside, other shows, Emergency, and ultimately I became from trainee to assistant to casting director, and I was only making at that point I started making $350 a week. I was casting 2 of Universal's hit shows, Rockford File and Beretta. And I knew the other people in the office was making a lot more. But because I had moved up so fast, so I grew a beard to go upstairs to meet with the head of the vice president. And I said, I think I'm working on 2 of the hit shows. The producers of those shows are so complimentary of my work, I'd like to have a raise. And he said, how much are you making? He says, I'm making $350 a week. He says, and how old are you? I said, I'm 20, I think I was 26. He said, you're too young to be making $350 a week. I didn't agree, but I wasn't in a position to quit. So I left. I said, okay. And show you how grace shows up in your life. There was a TV series, Red Fox was doing Sanford & Son. And he wanted a black casting director. Jane Murray had cast the pilot in the series, and he said, I want a black casting director. I was the only black casting director in Hollywood. So I made a deal with that series to cast the show under the table at a rate of $500 per episode. So I was casting, and it was a violation of my contract, at least with not a contract, but it was totally, not in keeping with Universal to be casting an outside series. So I was casting Rockford File and Beretta for Universal Studios. And unbeknownst to Universal, I was casting Sanford & Son at $500 a week. The great thing is that the Red Fox rehearsed on Lancashire Boulevard, in Lancashire and Magnolia. So I could leave Universal on my lunch break, go by, meet with him, talk to him about the casting and the producers, Saul Turtletop and Bernie Orenstein. And that went on for a couple of years.
Wow.
So, so much for the raise. Universal, Rockford File was a great experience because I made friends with a lifelong friend, Steve Cannell. Steve, Steve was born with two handicaps. One was that he was born rich and born with dyslexic. So he understood struggle. And so our conversations, we just bonded, and remained friends. In fact, his last book that he wrote, his novel is dedicated to me. He says to Reuben, my brother from a different mother. And he was just the best. But not just to me, we have annual gatherings where we celebrate Steve, because so many of us he was so encouraging and so generous with his time and his talent. But one year, during the Rockford File hiatus, Universal laid me off. And Jim Garner considers anyone who works on his show his family. And they didn't bother to call Jim to say we're going to lay him off. So Jim at the time was having knee surgery. And he said, you tell those Universals, in his words, that I'm not coming back to work until Reuben Cannon comes back to work. All right? I mean, that was the level of devotion he felt about his people who worked with him. When Universal laid me off, I was offered to cast a movie, The River Niger. It was the first time I'd done any casting outside of the studio. And I liked it. I really liked the idea. First, my office was in the basement of the studio. I didn't have a window. So here I was now outside, working in an office, casting. It was a temporary job, but casting a movie, River Niger. And I received a call from Universal telling me that they had made a mistake, because they wanted to keep Jim Garner happy, and would I consider coming back? And I said, I must tell you, I'm not sure I want to come back. I really like, So they said, well, you'll have lunch with us. I said, sure. So I had lunch with the vice president, the guy who told me I was too young to be making $350 a week, and some other vice presidents, and they said, we want to offer you a contract. And I said, you may not understand this, but I'm not coming back because today I saw a rainbow. And the truth of the matter, before I went to lunch to meet with these gentlemen, I looked out the window and there was a double rainbow. And I automatically started writing on a piece of paper, how many rainbows have I missed? How much beauty has been denied me? Although there's been a paycheck beside me, I wonder, how many rainbows have I missed? So I took that to lunch, and I said, I saw a rainbow, so I can't come. I saw a double rainbow. I'm sure they looked at me, so with total bewilderment. I said, so I thank you for the opportunity. And then life changes, which makes you reconsider your decisions. As I mentioned to you before, I was a father at 17, so I left and I got married at 19. I actually ended up marrying the mother of my daughter, my first daughter, and we got divorced before I left Chicago. The mother of my daughter died, and I told her she could come live with me. So in order to have a stable life, I told Universal I would come back with the contract, and I stayed for another year and a half or so. When the contract was an annual basis, I asked for not to have it renewed because I received an offer from Warner Brothers.
So before we get to Warner Brothers,
sure.
I just wanted to talk about a couple of those shows that you were working on at Universal.
Okay.
You mentioned Emergency.
Yes.
Any particular memories of casting that show?
Oh yeah, that show was a great opportunity because I had pretty free reign to cast those shows. So I interviewed a young actor who was here in town doing a play named John Travolta. And I hired him for his first role.
Oh, wow.
So it was John Travolta's first job in there. Cecily Tyson appeared as a day player because the show was done in 3 days. So it was a Jack Webb show, which was very formulaic, but it was a great opportunity. I used it as a casting opportunity to hire aspiring actors, emerging actors, but it's really theater actors, people that were in town that were struggling because, the series didn't require stars. It just because I guess the paramedics, Randy Mantooth and Kevin Tighe were the stars, and it was low budget and shot in a very efficient way. And so casting wise, so it was a great chance for me to use that show as a opportunity. So a lot of actors received their first job on Emergency.
How many rounds of auditions did you typically do? Or?
I would do a lot of auditions. I would almost grant an interview, an audition to anyone. I mean, I just loved in meeting actors and finding out. And usually I would create an environment of relaxation. I wanted to first talk to them about their life, and that's so because I'm just interested in people. So I met former monks who. There was one guy who said, I said, well, before you became an actor, where'd you live? He said, well, I lived in a monastery. And he said, I was a monk. I said, well, what's the most challenging thing you ever had to do as a monk? And he thought, and he says, one time I disassembled a spider web without disturbing a spider. I mean, those type of interviews. I mean, just, then we have I would talk to people about their life, and then we do the audition. I did a lot of interviews, a lot of auditions, and was kind of the go-to person at Universal for shows. I mean, Steve Bochco had a show called Del Vecchio, and I interviewed Debbie Allen came in to see me, and she brought her sister with her to the audition, Felicia Rashad. So when I left, I said, "Who's the person out in the lobby?" And so that's Debbie's sister, Felicia. I said, "Well, have her come in and audition." So she came in and auditioned, and we hired her even for an episode in Del Vecchio.
Did you work on Tenafly as well?
I worked on Tenafly. Tenafly was an interesting. James McKeechan, who was a friend and became a friend, and the politics behind that show is that Tenafly was one of the first black long-form series at Universal, starring a black actor. And I thought it was a terrific show. It ran for one season, and Lillian Layman played his wife. And I've always took pride in the fact that trying to cast shows with a balance of new and new talent and old talent, and but also what Universal also provided me the opportunity when I came back with the contract. I asked if I could hire my own assistant. So I said yes, so I hired a gentleman named Bob Moronis, a young man. So he became the first Hispanic casting trainee. And later on, we reconnected on some projects as well when I did casting for Robert Rodriguez. So I was always aware that not only was it, who else can I bring along with me, given the imbalance in Hollywood in terms of employment for minorities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to Warner Brothers.
Okay.
So
doing my, I asked not to have my contract renewed with Universal because I received an offer from Warner Brothers. It was a very generous offer, and during that time also, I was engaged to get married to then would be my second wife, and I knew with the salary that Warner Brothers was offering was double my salary from Universal. I think Universal was paying me like $35,000 or $40,000 a year, and Warner was offering $75,000 a year to be head of the entire casting department. So I'd have a title and a nice salary, but most importantly, I would have a chance to cast a sequel to Roots. The first Roots had been such a phenomenal hit. They were doing a follow-up, and they said, "You're one assignment we can guarantee that you'll be responsible for casting will be Roots 2." So it was just too attractive to turn it down. So I left Universal and went over to Warner Brothers, and there once again hired and staffed myself with a woman named Eileen Knight, who became the first black female casting director in Hollywood, and who went on to have a wonderful career of her own. But Roots provided me an opportunity to work with Stan Margulies and David Wolper, and I mean along all the way, every producer, even during Universal days, I would consider myself to be a student, because I always aspired to be. I knew I would one day be producing, which meant to me being responsible for the product, just taking more responsibility, and because casting, the way I look at it, is basically the quote that 80% of direction is casting. Well, I think 80% of filmmaking is good writing and good casting, and not to say that 20% is not important. It's like, whatever, your heart's 20% of your body, but you can't make it without it. So the director's vision in composing a movie is only, but if you have a good story and you get the casting right, you have to work hard to mess it up. So working with every producer, every aspect I treated it as an educational opportunity. So working on Roots with Sam Margulies, who became a dear friend, and David Wolper, and just watching the way that they assembled this, it was one of the largest, miniseries ever. And that set the stage for me to ultimately cast two of the other largest miniseries in the history of television. That's Made in America and also, America with a K, and The Winds of War. Mm-hmm. But it was the Roots that required a special employment contract for actors because there was 3-day, there was weeklies, but for a miniseries, the period of time, some of the schedules built into the Screen Actors Guild agreement wasn't really designed. So if you had to pay actors, if you hire an actor 1 month or 1 week in month A, and then you have to hire him another 3 months later to come back because the series covered such a span. So SAG created, and I helped devise a special format of hiring actors for Roots. And it was, and once again, my love of actors was not to deny or to cheat actors, but simply to create a hiring format that worked for both the production company as well as the actor.
So what do you think you learned from working with David Wolper and Stan Margulies?
Oh, just, put quality first. Quality, there was no compromise, and David had enough, and because of the success of the first one, and the detail, just the detail and the preparation, really, that the way you prep is the way you shoot, and just really the quality that went into that, uncompromising, and creating opportunities. The George Stanford Brown directed an episode, and Lloyd Richards, who was one of the most noted, distinguished black directors at the time. He was head of the drama department at Yale, but had a storied career as a acting coach and ran the Eugene O'Neill Festival. And Stan Margulies provided him an opportunity. So wherever you can promote talent, do it.
So talk about the casting process a little, because you had a mix of known and unknown actors for that.
Oh yeah, and it was such a phenomenal experience where everyone from unknowns to Marlon Brando, and finding and when picking up, when the bar had been set so high with the first Roots, and the story was a continuation, and the scripts were excellent. So, it wasn't as challenging as I thought it would be because everyone wanted to be part of it. And actually, it was Marlon Brando wrote a letter to Alex Haley saying, if there's a sequel, I'd like to be part of it. Right? So it wasn't like we went after him. He reached out to us. But throughout finding roles for so many black actors, it was a crowning glory for me to be able to, so many actors I admired and wanted to hire. The frustration was there was more talent than I could ever accommodate, but at least, we had the pick of the best, and so many actors received their first jobs in there, like from Howard Rollins to Dorian Harewood. Just list goes on. In fact, not Debbie Allen, but Chip Fields reminded me that her daughter Kim Fields had a very small role in that. But then I would say maybe the highlight of, even though there's so many wonderful moments during casting of Roots 2, was the day that Marlon Brando shot his scene. Now, you have to know that there was some concern that Marlon Brando the producers weren't sure he would show up. So we hired Anthony Zerbe, paid Anthony Zerbe $5,000 to stand by. In my negotiations with Marlon Brando's attorney, I think his name Wally Wolf, he called, he says, well, so Marlon wants to be part of Roots 2. So you and I need to negotiate a deal for him. And he says, so here's what I think we should do. Who's the highest paid actor you have so far in the cast? I said, that's Paul Winfield. Paul Winfield is working for one day, and we're paying his salary is $12,500 for the day, plus 2 days of looping. He says, the attorney says, let's just assume, it may not be true, but let's assume that Marlon Brando is twice as good and twice as famous as Paul Winfield. Therefore, you should pay him twice as much. I said, sounds fair to me. I'll get approval and I'll call you back. So Marlon Brando was paid $25,000, for one day's work to play George Lincoln Rockwell in a scene with Alex Haley. Once again, because he's an artist, so unpredictable behavior, we hired Anthony to stand by. But the day when it came time for him to work, the day when he received the call, and he was on the set. And I remember going to the set that day. It was a closed set, and there was James Earl Jones playing Alex Haley. And it was based on a real episode in Alex Haley's life where Alex Haley was given the assignment to interview George Lincoln Rockwell, the Nazi leader and racist. And so I could hear the rehearsal as I entered the soundstage. I could hear Marlon Brando's voice. I could hear the conversation. And I get close to the set. I could stand in the back and watch the rehearsal. And I see people holding up cue cards for Marlon to read. And there are cue cards on the ceiling. There are cue cards on the floor. And the conversation is something like with him questioning Alex Haley about his lineage. He says, you must have a lot of white blood in you to be as smart as you are. And he's saying these lines, and the lines he's saying is on a poster behind Alex's head. So then he takes his pipe and he shakes his pipe on the ground, and there's some dialogue on the ground, on the floor. And he says, because you're just too smart to have all Negro blood in you. So there's the conversation. And I'm looking at this, and when it was cut together, it was such a brilliant performance. But knowing that it was all, and I'd heard about the cue cards that Marlon, he would read the script and he'd come to work, and it was all cue cards. But he has such a technique that you didn't realize that. So even when I look at The Godfather now, and I see the performance. That Don Corleone is looking around. Every look there, his eyes are landing on the cue card. But I still think he's a brilliant actor. The scene was brilliant. James Earl was fantastic. It was just one of the highlights of that experience with Roots 2.
Yeah, Brando won an Emmy for that
role.
He
won an Emmy, and I don't know if he was there to accept. I don't think he accepted, but if he had accepted, he probably would have needed a cue card.
And talk about working with Alex Haley.
Alex was just that was just a bonus. I mean, we became friends, and I ultimately went on to cast Palmer Towns for him, and got to know Alex and his life on a level that was one of the great blessings of my life. And he talked about Roots, the journey of Roots, and his experiences and his life. I mean, there's the book, there's the miniseries, and then there's Alex the Man. I mean, he's one of the kindest, most gentle, and the most literate and writers I've ever known. Yeah.
So would he and the other producers approve every casting decision that you made, or how did that work?
Alex wasn't so much involved in the casting, but Stan Margulies and the directors was pretty much at that point. There was total confidence on the part of the studio, of the network, that they knew what they were. That Warner Brothers and Stan and Stan Margulies and David Wolper knew what they were doing, and I had a very good reputation at that point as well. And so there was very little interference with the casting process, and the opportunity as I said, to blend. I mean, even though it was a role I think Olivia de Havilland we ended up casting in the movie with Henry Fonda. I mean, the
Ruby Dee.
The Ruby Dee, the cast. I mean, as I'm recalling now, but it was just imagine it. It was I was in heaven. I was in heaven. Yeah.
And then in 1978, you started your own company.
And I tell you what inspired that. So I'm under contract to Warner Brothers as head of casting, and after I finished casting Roots 2, meanwhile, Warner Brothers, I was overseeing all the other casting that they had. They had TV shows, they have our sitcoms, dramas, movie of the weeks, and Alan Shane was the president of at that time of Warner Brothers Television. And there was so much production that the casting department couldn't accommodate all of it. So we had to outsource one of the projects, a movie of the week. And during that period of time, we're now around 78, 79, somewhere in there. The largest independent casting director was a gentleman named Lynn Stallmaster. And so Warner Brothers hired Lynn Stallmaster to cast a movie for television that was being made for Warner Brothers. When I saw what Lynn Stallmaster was being paid for one movie of the week and looked at my salary, I'm saying, if I'm half as good as Lynn, if I'm making $75 a year and they're paying him $35 to cast or $25 to make a movie of the week, I can do that. So I asked to have my contract I made a request not to have my contract renewed, and I hung out my shingle as Reuben Cannon and Associates. Now, during that time, I was also a newlywed, and my wife was studying for the bar, and I was a single father, and the only breadwinner in the house. So I go from having a steady paycheck to now filing for unemployment. The only time in my life I ever filed for unemployment was during this period of time. So I hung out my shingle. I had cast 2 projects as Reuben Cannon Associates. One was the Alex Haley project, Palmerstown, and another one called Lazarus Syndrome. And both of those pilots became series, and I was in business.
Let's talk about those. Let's talk about Palmerstown, USA.
Yeah, Palmerstown, USA was based on Alex's childhood. He wanted to tell the story of his childhood, in which he had I think it covered from 8 to 11 years of age, maybe from 8 years to 11 to 12. And the basic storyline, the story arc was to be about Alex his best friend was, and growing up in Henry, Tennessee, was a young white boy that was the same age. They were neighbors, maybe half a mile apart, but they did everything together. They were best friends. And it just showed that in spite of the racial politics in that community, how these 2 boys were friends. Their friendship knew no color and was able to transcend color. And their families also weren't that close, but at least they respected the friendship. And the story the series would have come to an end, or at least taken on a different dimension, because what happened in real life, Alex tells a story, was that one day when he was 12 years old and his friend was 12, his friend came to the door and said, "I can't play with you anymore. My father says it's time for you to know your place and for me to know my place." But that would have been the conclusion had the series stayed on, about the relationship between these 2 families. But that's what's inspired it, and that's what the story was based on. Yeah. So it was, but it allowed Alex and I to work together. During that period of time, he was developing a miniseries on Madam C.J. Walker, the first female millionaire, black or white, in this country. And Alex is very detailed. I mean, Alex is he's just a writing, he's a genius when it comes to writing. But he's a writer that you have to. In fact, if Alex was left to his own devices, Roots would never been made. The editor had to take it away from him because it had been 12 years. And the same with Madam C.J. Walker. He kept the detail, the research. We would have conferences at his home in Henry, Tennessee, where he would lay out these enormous storyboards about her journey. And we would say, "Alex, but where's the book? Where's the book?" We get the research, we get the detail, like maybe 5 years research, 5 years writing. So that project was never done, but we spent a lot of time talking about it. Yeah. So Palmerstown, that was the story behind Palmerstown. And once again, the casting there with Bill Duke and I can't even remember the rest of the cast.
Jermaine Johnson.
Jermaine Johnson.
And then unknown Michael J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox was. Thank you for. Michael J. Fox actually was a case where Michael J. Fox, who at the time was living in Canada, and so he auditioned. I auditioned and put him on video, and they liked him, and we had. And the question was, and I did something that was, hired him without him getting before his green card process was completed, on the faith that it would be completed. So he started to work before he became a completely American citizen, or at least with American credentials.
Do you remember his audition at all?
I remember very well.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, it showed great skill and poise and a little nervousness, but he with enormous confidence, and I'm not even sure. I wonder if he remembers, that was his first job here in America. Yeah, yeah.
Did you see star potential in him at that point, or?
It's hard to say star potential because what you see is skill. If you see skill and for TV, likability and personality, I mean, TV is a personality medium. So when you see personality and skill combined in a young actor, anything is possible. I mean, and years ago I was doing a movie and Leonardo DiCaprio came in to audition, and he had been on a TV series, but it was obvious that he was on a different level, on a different level. In fact, I think there was a movie done for Steve Friedman, and we auditioned Leonardo DiCaprio, Keanu Reeves, and we hired Keanu Reeves. The movie was called About Last Night. It was obvious then that Leonardo was special.
So talk a little bit about the structure of Reuben Cannon and Associates. You had something called franchise casting.
Yeah, well, the idea was once it started with just the two shows, Palmerstown and with Lazarus Syndrome for Bill Blinn and Jerry Thorpe was the producers of Lazarus Syndrome, which starred Lou Gossett. And interesting in the casting of that series, it was written for the guy who played Chester on Gunsmoke, who later on became in Lazarus Syndrome. It was written for it. It was written for a white actor. Mm-hmm. And in casting pilots, the networks, they go down the list of the usual suspects, and after they finish going through all the white actors, and when would do my list as a casting director, you do a list of suggestions. And my list always included, actors of color and, various ages. It would be very extensive. I would look at the universe because sometimes one idea may lead you toward another. So I had Lou Gossett on the list. And Lou Gossett had won the Academy Award at that time for Officer and a Gentleman. And so Jerry and Thorpe and Bill Blinn loved the idea. So they said, we have to time this because if we go in with it now, it's going to be shut down. Unless we have to explore all these other actors, Dennis Weaver. So it was written for Dennis Weaver. So if you keep that in mind, you can understand the journey. So how do you get from Dennis Weaver to Lou Gossett? And so Dennis Weaver turned it down. Then we went to another actor, the actor who starred in The Fugitive, David, whose name I can't, the star, but all the usual suspects we would go through. A week before production, we said to the network, we have a great idea. And the head of the casting at the network, I believe it was Pam Dixon, she supported the idea. And she said, look, let's bring it up at the right time because if you bring it up now, So a week before production, it was agreed we would go in and present the idea of Lou Gossett. And it was, wouldn't require rewriting the script, putting anything so-called quote ethnic. Let's just on the skill, on the base of his talent. And it was ABC, I believe. So they said yes. Maybe because once again, when you talk about the ripple effect of success of other shows, they had success with Roots, so they weren't afraid of casting black talent, and wasn't afraid that it might draw a massive crossover audience. And so it was Lou Gossett starting the show, didn't make any changes, didn't change one word, just simply cast the rest of the series around him with Sheila Frazier to play his wife and an unknown actor who I can't think of that ended up playing Nicole. He was a New York theater actor. But the series, didn't last.
We'll actually pick that up on the next tape.
Okay, great.